Okay. With that introduction, then we'll begin the discussion first with the introduction of all of the commissioners. I've introduced myself, Randy Speck, as chair of ANC3 representing single member district 34G03. Jerry, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Jerry Mallitz, representing 3G05, which is basically from Chevy Chase Circle down the east side of Connecticut to Military and across to Broad Branch.
Abe?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Abe Clayman, and I'm a commissioner representing Hawthorne and part of Barnaby Woods. It's called 34G01. I'm also the secretary for tonight and for the ANC, so I'll be taking the minutes, and so you'll see me look over here to type a little bit. And I'm also, like Randy said, helping to answer questions, and we'll sometimes be chatting you messages. Your chat audio and video is disabled unless you're presenting or part of a presentation, but you can still ask questions during the using the Q&A function.
And Shanda?
Hello, everyone. Welcome tonight. Thank you for coming. I'm Commissioner Shanda Tuck Garfield, and I represent ANC 34G02. I'm on the part of the district that's closest to Oregon Avenue, also bounded by Military and Utah. And thank you for coming this evening.
Great. We have a quorum of 4. That's all that's necessary to be able to conduct business. We are expecting some of the other commissioners, I think, later on. But we'll go ahead and begin now because we've got a lot to cover tonight. With regard to the Q&A function, I did want to mention one other thing, and that is that especially during our presentations about the Task Force on Racism, this is basically a meeting tonight for presentations to the commissioners. So we're going to focus on getting a clear understanding of what the task force has recommended, and then having questions from commissioners. But we're expecting to have what we're calling a town hall on probably November 16th, when we're going to be taking a lot of comments and questions and suggestions from the community. And tonight's Q&A, if you have questions about the presentations and particularly the task force reports, please put those in the Q&A, and we will be monitoring that and collecting all of that so that we can respond to them perhaps as a FAQ or something like that, where we can put together and organize all of the questions and try to respond to them. And we'll put that up on our website so everyone will have availability to it. Okay, I think that's...
Randy?
Yes, Abe?
Sorry, I should raise my hand. But do you want me to be compiling those questions? I don't mind doing that. That'd be helpful.
Yeah, if you can, that would be great. Okay, the agenda for tonight's meeting was posted on our website and on various listservs in the community. There's one modification that we needed to make because of something that just came up over the weekend, and that is to consider a resolution again offering our support for the grant for the Chevy Chase Main Street. Surprisingly, District Bridges won the grant, were told that they had been awarded the grant, were given an agreement to sign, in which they signed. And then they were told by the Department of Small and Local Business Development that the grant was being cut because of budget considerations. So we're trying to get that reinstated. And so at the very end of the meeting tonight, what I would propose is that we consider that resolution, which is just an affirmation of what many of us have already said with regard to the application for that grant. Okay, with that amendment, any other changes or modifications to the agenda? Okay, all those in favor of adopting the agenda, raise your hand. 4-0. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll go through some announcements. We do have several that really do need to be made, I think, tonight. The first is that on November 16th at 9 a.m., the Council's Committee on Transportation and the Environment will hold a public roundtable on the district's Department of Transportation Slow Streets Initiative. And you'll recall that our last meeting, we had a long discussion about a proposal for a slow street on Tennyson Street. And so they will be taking testimony on the 16th. And they're considering, what they're looking at is ways to improve the Slow Streets Initiative. And they cite concerns that have been raised by residents about the effectiveness of the initiative due to confusing signage, poor communications, and perplexing street choices to serve as slow streets. And so we'll be taking that up actually at our next meeting on November 9th. But anyone who wants to testify on that can contact Amika Benjamin at the council, at the committee. She works for the committee. And her email address and telephone number will be in our minutes as well. Then secondly, another hearing that's coming up in November is the comprehensive plan proposed amendments. And the committee of the whole of the council is going to be considering that on November 12th and 13th. And the hearing is going to be conducted virtually, again, on Zoom. And the committee encourages transcribed testimony that can be taken either by email or voicemail and submitted to cow@dccouncil.us, which is their email address. And you can also call and leave a voicemail message that up to 3 minutes that will be transcribed. And this is an important issue that our commission has considered for a long time. And we're also going to be taking up the possibility of testimony again at our November 11th, our November 9th meeting. The next announcement is with regard to the WMATA bus depot, which has been on our agenda many, many times before. I received a notice today that WMATA will begin construction of the bus depot very soon. We've heard that before, however. As a result of the construction, the L2 bus stop terminal, which is at the terminal now, will be moved to Connecticut Avenue and Northampton Street temporarily during the construction. And finally, I just want to remind everyone that you should be mailing in your ballots for the November 3rd election or dropping them at the various drop boxes up until November 3rd. The old early voting centers open tomorrow and will be open through November 2nd from 8:30 until 8:30 in the morning until 7 p.m. And the Board of Elections urges everyone to vote early if possible, but if you're voting on election day, November 3rd, there will be a number of additional voting centers that will be open then from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Okay, anyone else have any announcements to make? No? Okay, all right. Our next item on the agenda then is a discussion and possible vote on the application by Cara Cook for a special exception from the rear yard requirements to construct a second-story rear addition to her existing house at 2628 Moreland Place. And Shanda, you want to introduce that?
Okay. Well, tonight we have Kara and Will Cook, who Commissioner Clayman will assist us with during the presentation part. They're here this evening because they're new residents to the Chevy Chase community, a new family, and we want to welcome them here. And they recently purchased a home on Moreland Place. It's 2628 Moreland Place, and they want to make some improvements to their home. And so tonight they're before us basically as a part of the BZA application process. And they're going to basically be describing the project that they're planning and answer any commission questions that we have subject to their presentation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kara and Will.
Yeah, they should be rejoining now as a panelist or momentarily.
Okay. There we go. Okay, here they are.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey guys.
So Randy, how would you like for us to proceed?
Well, Will and Kara can just explain what their application is and what they're asking for the special exception before the Board of Zoning Adjustments.
Sure. So we are basically putting on a second story to an existing single family home. And the reason it's going through the BZA is because it currently has like a pop out on the side and on the back that is non-conforming with the zoning as it stands now. And in order to kind of make the first floor more cohesive, we're basically just making the back wall conform with the pop outs on the side and the back. So we're not going any further than it currently is. It's just going to be more uniform on all sides. But the structure as it is right now is non-conforming, so we would have had to go through the BZA no matter what.
Mm-hmm. And currently you have you're expanding upward, correct?
Yes, so that plus a second floor, because it's a raised ranch right now. So it's, you drive into the garage and then there's one floor. So we'll be putting on another floor as well.
Can you tell us, have you contacted your neighbors to see if they've had any objections to it?
Yep, so we spoke directly with our immediate neighbors and then the ones across the street in person. And then we've been on emails and text message change with basically every single person on the block. Some of which asked me a few questions. We shared our plans. We're gonna stop by to the neighborhood block party for Halloween.
Socially distance, of course.
Socially, yes. So everybody seems really supportive and excited, hopefully. Hopefully it'll be short and painless for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But that's always a question that the BZA asks to whether there's any objection.
Yeah.
I think part of the process required us to be in touch with, I think all neighbors within a 200-foot square. I can't remember the exact square footage, but
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
Right.
So have they signed something that says they're fine with all of this?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. The two immediate neighbors to the left and the right did, and those are in our BZA application in case you
Mm-hmm.
need.
Right. And then you mentioned behind you, there's nothing, you abut the woods.
it's
Yeah.
a DC easement, so it's DC property.
Mm-hmm.
Because I guess Moreland is a cul-de-sac.
Yes.
Sort of a funny strip of DC land back there, and for the neighbors and ourselves included, it seems like a lot of that DC land is sort of part of people's backyards, sort of not part of people's backyards.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of one of those DC. I think we're responsible for managing the land, but it's DC.
Right.
Yeah. If you kind of look at the map, our cul-de-sac behind it is kind of a cul-de-sac and then another cul-de-sac and then some DC property in between. So directly behind us is DC property and then another back of a home on a completely separate cul-de-sac.
Right. But you're not in any way with your project going onto that at all.
No,
No.
not even remotely close.
I think that our non-conforming part of those bump outs extends a foot and a half beyond what the statutes stipulate, and the home was built before the zoning
Yes.
regulations were put into effect.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Okay.
Any other commissioners have questions? Okay, Shannon, you want to make a motion?
Okay. Well, tonight I make a motion that we support and welcome the Cook family to the neighborhood. And the motion is that the ANC3 does not object to their rear yard application.
There's a second?
Guys, we appreciate it.
Okay, all those in favor?
Okay.
4-0. Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate
Thank
you
you,
coming in.
guys.
Okay. Thank you.
And-
Thank you very
Have a
much.
great night.
Well,
All
welcome
right.
to the neighborhood.
And come back
Thank
for
you.
more meeting.
In 6 months.
Okay.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is a brief presentation by the Department of Public Works on the bagged leaf collection program. And the reason why we're doing this now is the program is going to start actually before our next meeting. And so we thought it would be helpful. And there have been a lot of questions that have been raised on the listserv. Celeste Duffy from the Department of Public Works is here, I think, tonight. Abe, if you could make her a panelist. And I gave Celeste a list of 6 questions before the meeting so that we could expedite the process here. And these are questions that I have gathered from looking at the listserv and talking to some of the residents about their concerns over the leaf collection program. So Celeste, we've seen the brochures that you have on your website and the schedules that have been posted. So I think we're familiar with those things. But if you could just focus on these questions, that would be very helpful to us. The first one was about why you're undertaking this project when ostensibly because of the public health emergency, when crews that are doing trash and recycling are in close proximity to each other as well. So how is this different from trash and recycling?
Well, thank you so much for having me this evening. And I appreciate always coming back. I believe I come every year around leave time and we have a little chat. But you're right, this year is different, and thank you for providing questions, because we really want people to understand the program this year and why the leave program has changed. Certainly, as part of the mayor's phase 2 reopening and to adapt, many district government agencies, and certainly ours, has had to adapt in many ways to the public health emergency and to respond to keeping residents and DPW employees safe. With that said, it was decided that the former program, which was a manual leaf collection program, you all remember we asked you to rake your leaves out into the tree box, and then we would have a crew. Crew was usually about 15 to 18 people that raked the leaves from the tree box into the middle of the street, and then we'd have a vac come down the street and that would suck up all the leaves. Those crews worked in coordination. You didn't have one person down the street, another person in the middle, and another person up the street. They worked very much in coordination. So as they would rake, they would vac, they would rake, they would vac, and they would go all the way down the street. And it involved having a lot of people that worked closely together at the same time. So what this year's bagged leaf program is, we're asking our residents to rake those leaves, put them in the bag, and then put the bags in the tree box. Allows us to cut our crew size down to, depending upon the tree canopy in the area, but maybe somewhere between 3 and 5 instead of 18 people on site together at the same time.
Okay. Another question was, and this was a question particularly from seniors, about how they could get their leaves bagged if they're not able to do it themselves. And I know that there is a hardship assistance collection program. Are people who are over 65 automatically eligible for that? I know if you have a disability, you have to establish your disability, but are seniors exempt from that?
No, so they're not automatically enrolled. To be enrolled in the hardship collection program, you need to call 311 and ask to be a part of the hardship collection. If you don't have to be disabled, if you're over 65. So if you're over 65, you don't have to be disabled to be in it, but you do have to be living in a home where there isn't someone living in the home that's available to help you rake your leaves.
Okay, but just call 311 for that, is that right?
311 and ask to be enrolled in the hardship assistance program.
Okay, some other residents have asked about getting more than 20 bags because they say they've got a large tree canopy and they've got a lot of leaves and they're going to have a need for more than 20 bags. Is the only alternative then to go to the hardware store or grocery store and try to buy those?
Yes, at this time, we've purchased the 20 bags to offset some of the disruption to the regular leaf collection program and to assist residents with participation in the bag collection program, and to give all of the households that we service 20 bags each. It has resulted in 2.4 million bags that the district has purchased. And so I don't think, I'm pretty sure at this point it's a one-time only bag distribution. And one of the reasons that we don't name specific retailers that sell bags is because government isn't really able to advertise for a particular business. But home goods stores, some grocers and other types of hardware stores, those types of retailers do have those bags. And those bagged leaves will be composted.
Okay, and when are you expecting to distribute those leaves? I know in our neighborhood, the first collections are going to be, I think, November 9th. When can we expect to get the bags?
I don't have an exact date, but I do know, I believe our bags are being delivered. And as soon as they're delivered, we have a company that is helping us to distribute those bags. So it will happen immediately on delivery. We will begin that.
But well in advance of November 9th?
I don't know how well in advance of November 9th, but it will be in advance of November 9th. We know that we've asked residents to prepare for collection, and we know that we need to provide you with the bags that you need so that we can have a successful collection.
And what happens if it rains on those bags? Are they going to be able to survive wet weather, wet leaves going in them?
I have not seen a bag yet. I'm hoping to see one this week. So I can't quite tell you. I'm hopeful that we have a sturdy enough bag that they can maintain their integrity in the rain. And I'm also hopeful that when on those weeks of collection that we pick them up quick enough because, you know, we don't control the weather. I mean, we're not in charge of the rain, unfortunately, but I'm hoping that the bags that we purchase are sturdy enough to maintain their integrity.
Okay, the last question that I got was one I received today, and that is this resident composts her leaves, and so she basically leaves them in the tree box. Is there going to be any kind of penalty if people don't bag those leaves and are not expecting them to be picked up, but just leaving them in their yard to compost?
No, I don't think there's going to be a penalty. I don't believe we're going to issue warnings, and that I need to check if you would just get a warning notice. But I'm sure there won't be a citation or a fine of any kind.
Okay. Thank you, Celeste. That's been very helpful. Other commissioners have questions?
Yes.
Jerry?
You see some people already are putting their leaves in the street, as people a lot of times do. And since they're not going to be picked up and they're not going to be bagged, what's going to happen? Because a lot of these leaves take up a lot of parking spaces.
Well, certainly if you have a specific location where that's happening, at the moment, we don't see much of that in the city, but hopefully as leaf season goes on, as you know, later in the season, more leaves fall. We would hope that kind of stuff wouldn't continue. But if you could, email with the location, we would go out and check it out and probably try to handle it.
Okay, thank you.
Abe?
Thanks for informing us about this tonight. One question is, what happens to leaves that are just on the ground that just fall, whether or not someone put them there? Are they getting vacuumed, or are they just left there?
Oh, you mean leaves that are not bagged that are laying on the street?
Yeah, and maybe they weren't put there by a resident, they just are on the street.
I think that we probably may be able to at some point, like I said, where there's specific instances that it's an issue, because we are asking the residents to rake the leaves, their leaves from their house, obviously the leaves that fall in the tree blocks, and the leaves that are underneath cars. So we are hoping that will alleviate much of that, but if there's somehow very dense tree canopy in a particular place and they just sort of fall, that's another one where you would send me an email and we try to get that handled.
Is it possible to also put in 311 requests for like excessive leaves in a certain area that need to be cleaned up?
I don't think there's a 311 for excessive leaves, but I can check on that and I can get back to Commissioner Spack.
Okay, but otherwise residents can email you?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I just anticipate that there's just a lot of leaves that fall in the street that aren't really, that people don't see as kind of their responsibility. And beforehand, when there was a truck vacuuming, they would vacuum those up and they weren't distinguishing between raked and unraked leaves.
Mm-hmm.
Now that they're just grabbing the bags, there can be a lot of leaves that are left potentially.
Well,
But we'll let people know to email you. So,
and just across from your house and some places in my single member district as well are park lands that belong to any individual resident, and the leaves are going to fall there and nobody's going to be there to pick them up. I can't imagine that the Park Service is going to do that. What provision is there for collecting those leaves?
If it's on the National Park Service land, they are responsible for that land, and we do interact with them quite often. Obviously, we live in a city where we share a lot of real estate, land and otherwise, with the federal government. And so there is a relationship between the district and the Park Service, particularly if those leaves that have fallen, pose a danger, then certainly an immediate request to address that would be appropriate.
The last time I called the Park Service about a similar kind of problem with some down tree limbs, they said, well, the limbs may have been on Park Service land, but they fell on district property. It's district public space, and therefore it's their responsibility to clean it up. And DDOT did. But I think we may have a problem with that, but we'll have to let you know if there's something comes up. Okay, Chris, I see your
I
hand.
have a question. Yeah, I'm sorry I'm late. My wife is in the hospital, so I was visiting her. But anyway, did I hear correctly that the DC is not going to sweep up any leaves on the street? Because the way I read the release, it was just that the leaves were on people's yards. They're not going to sweep. They're not going to sweep up. So there's not going to be any vacuum trucks going down the streets in Chevy Chase.
Well, no, not in the traditional sense. On some of our major corridors and gateway streets, there may be some vac operations, but in terms of collecting residential leaves in the traditional sense, no, generally no.
That's going to be a disaster. I mean, we've got tons of trees in our neighborhood, and the streets just fill up with leaves, and I just don't see the neighbors bagging all these leaves. It's not going to happen, and so you're going to have car fires. I mean, this is going to be a major problem. I think something needs to be done about it. I mean, this is the first time I've been living in the district for 40 years, and this is the first time this has ever happened. So, and I think COVID's a lame excuse for it, if you want to know the truth.
Well, unfortunately, I hope, and with all due respect, I hope that's not the case. Certainly we don't want car fires. We don't want any type of
It's going to be a disaster.
dangerous activity. And we hope that we will be able to impress upon residents to help us. We need to get the leaves up. We know that. And we've established a schedule and a crew to be able to do it. And maybe even this isn't ideal for sure. We certainly can accept that it's a definite change from the way we've traditionally been able to do it. And so we really do need residents' help for exactly the reasons you're saying.
Then just to add on, I'd like to chime in on that. I guess if you look at the statistics in our community, we have a higher percentage of retirees and seniors in our community. So that's one thing that I'm also worried about in terms of residents getting assistance with this process, because even though that we have a lot of younger families and we have others, the majority of our community are retirees. So to work with your agency to perhaps look at other viable options would also be a great thing here. Is your agency open to that? Like just based on, like, say, our ANC giving our perspective on how our community may differ, and perhaps, in some modified version, maybe not the extreme of, either the neighbor doing it only themselves or you all doing it, but some modified version. Are you all open to considering that?
Oh, we're certainly always open to hearing something that could be helpful, but please let your neighbors know that if they enroll in that hardship program, or if they're on DC government's current disability list, we will come and bag their leaves for them.
Okay, thank you.
There was one question on the Q&A about whether any of the workers, DPW workers, would be laid off or anything because of this. Are you still going to have the same number of employees?
For the LEAF program?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, we do, generally we do to make those large crews. Sometimes there's temporary work available for leaf crew, but DPW actual employees are all still here. And my understanding is, as far as I know, I mean, I don't control the budget for the city or anything, but as far as I know, we're all still here.
So as far as you know, this isn't a cost-cutting measure. It's related to the safety issue with regard to COVID. That's the justification.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Any other questions, commissioners?
No.
Okay. Well, Celeste, thank you very much. We appreciate every time you come out to our meetings and help us out. We very much appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me, and hopefully we'll all be back meeting at some point soon.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, next item on the agenda is the major issue for tonight, and that is the report and presentations from our task force on racism. And Shanda, you want to initiate that discussion, start us off there?
Yes. Well, I am very excited about tonight because it's the culmination of over 12 weeks of work. If everyone in the community will remember, ANC3 passed on June 8th, 2020, our statement on racism in response to some of the unfortunate events that have occurred across our country, some of the racial injustices ranging from incidents such as Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Our ANC passed a resolution, and along with that, we also, in the resolution, called for the task force on racism. So tonight, this work with over 12 weeks, hundreds of hours, and I believe over 30 members of the community actively working every week throughout this summer, despite issues with COVID-19 and this pandemic going on in our community. So tonight we will hear from the 3 work groups. They are community, education and health, and housing. I'd like to thank all of the commissioners, especially Commissioner Speck and Commissioner Mallett, who were co-facilitators on this task force for your hard work and dedication on this. I'd also like to thank Commissioner Clayman and Maludi for your support, throughout our tasks. Although you couldn't be there every day, you were there definitely with us in spirit. And so with that, Randy, I'll turn it over to you for, to begin the presentations for tonight.
Well, the community group is first, and you were the facilitator for the community group. So you want to introduce the presenters for that?
Okay. Yes, so yay, community group. Not anything against the other work groups, but the community work group, I must say, put forth a tireless, dedicated effort, extremely thoughtful. Tonight's presentation will be done by Gary Thompson, a former commissioner on this ANC, along with Lisa Gore. But prior to that, I would like to acknowledge the 10 dedicated members of our work group. They were Lisa Gore, Whitney King, Carl Lankowski, Peter Lynch, Libby Martin, Lisa Oakley, Ruth Robbins, Cal Simone, and Gary Thompson, and along with myself. So thank you for your work. And with that, I'll turn it over to Gary.
Shanda, I don't see Gary on the participants
I don't
list.
think
I just
Gary is.
promoted Lisa.
Hi, Lisa. Okay, let's
Lisa.
see.
We've got Lisa, but no Gary for the moment. Hi,
Okay.
Lisa.
Hey, Gary's supposed to be here. Let's see if he's down there in the phone numbers. Let's see.
Someone named Kristen Davis is raising their hand. Is that? I'm going to let them talk.
Okay.
Kristen? Is that Gary? Wait, another name
Yeah.
perhaps?
That's me, sorry.
Oh, good. Okay, Gary,
That
thanks.
happens. That
Thank you all for
happens.
coming.
Um,
And so with that, you and Lisa, I'll turn it over to you all to lead the presentation of the draft report of the community work group.
Okay. Hey, this is Gary Thompson. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. And I don't know if you can see me. Can you see me?
No, we
Gary,
can't
we,
see you
we
yet.
can't see you. I'm going to actually have you rejoin as a panelist so we can see you. And so if you need to show anything, a slide or something, you can. So hold on just a second. It's going to kick you out and bring you back in. And while we're waiting for Gary to join, Shanda or Randy, could you maybe just explain, is each group going to have a certain amount of time and then we're
Yes.
going to ask questions? How does this work? Just so everyone who's
Okay.
here knows.
Randy, if you'd like to describe the format.
Okay, basically each presentation will be about 10 or 12 minutes long. And then we'll have about 10 or 12 minutes of questions and discussion from the commissioners after each of the individual presentations. That will take us for about an hour. And then we will have another half hour or so when we can have discussion and questions related to the entire report. But there will be the 3 presentations for the 3 groups, and then and questions after each one of them, and then finally some overall questions.
Yes. And then after that, we'll talk about the next steps. Okay.
And I think I put this in the chat and Randy said it earlier, but if there are residents with questions, you should put your questions in the Q&A and we'll be compiling those so that we can, if we don't answer them tonight,
Yeah.
and probably even if we do answer them tonight, we'll post a full list on our website so people who have questions can see those there. Gary, we can see you now.
Okay. So welcome, Gary.
Hey. Hello, everybody. Nice to be in front of the commission. Thank you, Commissioner Tuck Garfield, for leading our group. You know, as she mentioned, we had a great group. We spent a lot of time discussing a lot of issues. And Lisa Gore and I are going to do our best to summarize what we've come up with so far. And then we'll be pleased to discuss and answer questions, and maybe other people in our group would like to chime in if needed. So I'm just going to go through the 11 specific recommendations that we've come up with after a lot of discussion. These are obviously in draft format at this point for your input and guidance. You know, the overall effort, of course, is to stay engaged, not issue like a one-time statement, but follow through and implement these things and other proposals as they come up. Our first specific recommendation is we think that the entire task force should have a mission statement. That's, you know, sometimes philosophically helpful for everybody to be guided by a common objective. So we spent a fair bit of time coming up with a sufficiently short mission statement. And so you'll see it in our 29-page report. There's an attachment. Attachment number 1 corresponds with this first specific recommendation. And the proposed mission statement is that the mission of the Chevy Chase Task Force on Racism is to raise awareness about the ongoing effects of historical and systemic racism in our community and promote change in pursuit of racial justice, diversity, and equity. So think about that, mull on it, think about some word changes, and that's what we've come up with collectively in our group. Our second specific recommendation is to establish a permanent or an ongoing task force on racism. You know, beyond the time that these reports are issued, at least for the indefinite future, to have an ongoing task force. You may end up merging the groups, or they may end up remaining separate. But whatever the case, this work's too important to sort of you know, handle in just a couple months we've had. This clearly is going to require a lot of long-term commitment. Our second attachment dives a little bit more into that. Recommendation 3 is to create a racial response network. There's not a lot of precedent for this, but the concept is that oftentimes people in our community would like to report or talk about racial incidents, and they may want to do so completely confidentially with a group of committed listeners and community members, all the way from a confidential discussion up to potentially reporting it to the police if the circumstances require. And the details of a racial response network, will be worked out in practice. But it would start with the formation of what we're calling an incident response team. And then obviously some publication that this is a group that's formed and that's open for participation. And we'll start to take comment on this. And, there have been incidents in our neighborhood. Sometimes they pop up on the listserv. Sometimes people know about them from word of mouth. There's probably a lot more that we don't hear about or know about. So the point of this network is to create a safe and confidential space to handle how we respond as a community to any such incidents. The fourth specific recommendation is to utilize the physical space in the new community center to advance the mission of the task force. And we know that's a work in progress. The design is underway. There'll be great competition for the space. And we'd like to see a portion of the center dedicated to events and activities that promote racial justice. Education, workshops, seminars, social interaction, local business events, just sort of some way of knowing that there's space there that can be utilized. We also talked about the idea of just a history corner or maybe even a small room with a dedicated library that a group like Historic Chevy Chase DC could utilize to house a collection of materials about our history with a particular emphasis on the diversity of our history. Number 5, which is interrelated, is just a list of recommended workshops and events that we think might work well obviously in the community center space or possibly in other locations. Number 6 is to have a website presence for our permanent task force and all these activities and events that we hope to foster going forward. Probably having our own website is going to be a little difficult and maybe expensive. So we were hoping there could be we could piggyback off the ANC website. We know there's already a pull down on the task forces, and hopefully we can utilize that space to keep information fresh, and we could post links on the listserv or whatever the case may be about what's happening. Number 7 is a broader sharing of community resources that can be interconnected with all of this. And our attachment number 7 has a nice sort of table of what those community sources are with points of contact and information in the link. Number 8 is to work closely with other organizations. So the obvious ones would be the ANC, the Chevy Chase Community Association, Historic Chevy Chase DC, Friends of Chevy Chase Circle, and others. And attachment 8 has a list of all the organizations we think we could partner with. Number 9 is to facilitate the ongoing work regarding the Newlands Fountain and possibly other naming issues. Our group agrees with the ANC that the Newlands Fountain should be denamed. And we talked a lot about whether it should be renamed, and if so, for whom. And ultimately, we decided that we would like to get more community input on that issue, including in the form of a community survey question. We don't want to skip over the threshold point. Should it be renamed? Because I think some people think it should just be called Chevy Chase Fountain and leave it at that. And then among those who think it should be renamed, there's obviously going to be, a dozen or more suggestions, all fine suggestions for a renaming. Just as an example from my own sort of personal sort of view is, John Lewis Fountain. I really like that idea personally, but we want to be careful and just make sure we get a consensus here on whether we should even rename it at all. I mean, unlike Wilson High School, you can't just call that high school. It has to have some name, whereas the fountain could just be called the fountain. Number 10. And also on renaming, we didn't really spot anything else that really needs to be renamed in our view, or denamed. There's that little park that is sometimes called Newlands Park, but also it's alternatively named Little Flower or something like that. Google has
Little Forest.
Little Forest. Google Maps lists it both ways, and there's no consistency, so we wanted to see some consistency in making sure it's called Little Forest, period. Not even Little Forest, formerly known as Newlands. Number 10 is we want to be more actively engaged in district programs and policies and legislation as it impacts issues of race. This is going to take some work, but to try to follow legislation more closely, be in touch with our council members, and when something is up for consideration in a subcommittee, form some testimony, be at the ready to testify, obviously be at the ready to take advantage of grant programs such as the one you just mentioned, and basically just be more in touch with our city as it considers, as it will be considering, obviously a lot of these really heavy issues like reforming the police department. And finally, number 11 is a list of proposed community survey questions. We just came up with our own 6 or 7 or 8 questions that we think you might plug into a broader survey that I think is being designed in a manner that will elicit views on a lot of things. The way we've set it up is they're basically binary questions, favor or disfavor. That could be expanded to a 1 to 10 type, how strongly or your favor or disfavor type setup. One of the questions, as I mentioned, is do you think the circle should be renamed at all? And then the follow-up question is, and if so, do you suggest a name? So those are behind attachment 11, and that's basically the list of what we come up with to date. And I guess with that, I'll turn it over to Lisa Gore to talk about some of those specific ideas and what we've been through as a group.
So thank you, Gary, for the introduction, and good evening to all the commissioners and everyone on the line. My name is Lisa Gore, and I'm going to kind of just go over a little bit about the process that we use to get to our recommendations and how we actually got here. Shonda is definitely our fearless leader. She did a tremendous job, so thank you, Shonda, for all your leadership on this effort. I've been involved in a lot of efforts, towards community and also in government, and you did a tremendous job getting this all together. So thank you. We started off as a group very broad. We initially came together and were given 4 primary areas to kind of look at, and that was education of the community, history, diversification of business, and then examining naming issues. So we spent the first couple of meetings coming up with recommendations that fit into that broad category of topics. and we kind of narrowed them down from that point. So we kind of got into our brainstorming sessions after that, and Shonda kind of really led us into 3 core areas once we got our top priorities identified in those initial sessions, which was community awareness, physical environment, and district policies and programs. We initially started off with about 6 areas in community awareness, and I think most of those made our recommendation list. 3 areas, I believe we started off in physical environment. I believe all those are in that those recommendations as well. District policies and programs, I think we initially had roughly 5 and narrowed those down to 3. So we spent a lot of time with identifying and talking about those roughly 15 or so topics for a couple of weeks, and we narrowed them down to our 11 recommendations. During that process, we had a lot of discussion in terms of self-education. I think that's very important for all of our working groups. And a community working group, I'm sure, was not the only one that did that, but a lot of resource sharing. So educating ourselves on just what diversity means, what does it mean to each individual member of our group, inclusion, even terms, new terms that people learn, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color. How do we say or use, Black or African American? What does equity mean versus equality? So a lot of self-education and sharing of information and sharing our own personal stories. And then we kind of got down to our top priorities, which are the 11 recommendations that Gary discussed. So that's the basis and the body of our work. But that's how we kind of made the sausage, as they say. And I think everyone in the group did a tremendous job. I'm just can't speak enough for the individual members of this group. They're tremendous assets to the community. So with that, commissioners, do you guys have any questions? And I know there's probably some members of the group on the line. Do you have any questions for the community group?
As we said before, if attendees will put their questions in the Q&A, that would be very helpful. And commissioners, who wants to start? Chris?
Yeah, I have, my first comment is I just want to congratulate everybody for doing a fantastic job on this thing. There were a lot of very compelling things that came out of the report, and I think it was quite impressive. I have some overall comments, which I'll save to the end. But the one comment I have on the community group, which worries me, is there are very many continuing tasks and work groups just coming out of this one committee. And I just don't see how the ANC is going to spend the time doing all this stuff. And this is not just something that's, we're not just talking about something that's recommended to be done, for a couple of months. We're talking about something that's recommended to be done for years and years. And, some of these things, to me, really, I don't think are the kind of thing that an ANC should be doing. I mean, this is the kind of thing that district government should be doing. And I think some of these recommendations, like the Racial Response Network, hosting workshops and events and doing things like that, really should be a recommendations to the DC government. I just don't see how the ANC is going to do their other business if we're going to be doing all this stuff. I just don't see it. And I've been on a commission for 12 years, and this is more work than I've ever seen anybody propose. And this is only one of the 3 committees. So I just want to throw that out and ask you, how in the world are we going to do all this work?
Shonda, you want to go first?
Yes. Chris, you are on the pulse, because our committee actually, and the work group, please chime in, thought of this. This is not for the ANC to do. That is why one of the recommendations was for an ongoing task force group that would work in parallel with the ANC, because we realize, like in the past, if you look at it, there are a number of reports who've come out in communities to governmental bodies, and oftentimes those governmental bodies like ours do not have the time or the resources to implement it themselves. So that's why within the recommendations, there is a section that specifically talks about the continuation by having members of a work group, task force, et cetera, that works on the implementation part. And the work group, and members may chime in, realize that yes, the ANC cannot solely be responsible for this, that this is a community project. It's a first of its kind because believe me, we've done the research and we're ahead of the curve on this. A number of cities are only starting this month, September, October, to actually pass resolutions that form these type of task forces. So we're ahead of the game on this.
Well, that's great. If you could make that a little clearer in the report, because the way I read it was the ANC was going to be taking the lead in all this.
Okay, point taken.
And the only other thing about, let me just add one other thing. You guys need to have a executive summary like the other two committees have. So, because you know the whole report's 81 pages, and it'd be nice for people who don't want to go through the whole report to be able to read the executive summary.
Okay.
But anyway, great job. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Jerry?
Yeah, I second what Chris said. There's so much great information in here. You know, it's hard to believe that in June there was nothing, and now there's this. So, but I want to piggyback on something that Chris asked. And if you see me looking over here, I have two computers open.
Yeah.
One with this and one with this. So on the Create a Racial Response Network, in the write-up, it does say that the task force, the permanent task force, would establish a response team consisting of a group of volunteers who would be able to receive information, respond, provide information, so on and so forth. So when I saw this, it seemed to me that it was akin to a hotline, something like that. And people that work on hotlines are very well trained and a lot of times licensed, and volunteers, you know, you might even be opening yourself up to potential lawsuits if you give somebody information that doesn't work out. So I'm just wondering how that, you know, assuming that has nothing to do with the ANC, this is a group of people that are just, you know, a task force to the ANC, but still the training and everything that goes into that, even in some cases, potential licensing and insurance possibilities are all things that need to be considered. So I thought this was a lot to bite off also, and it's for those reasons that I just stated.
Lisa, Gary?
Yeah, well, we did, Jerry discussed that, and we talked about the potential legal liabilities. And one of the big things with the Racial Response Network is we are clearly aware there's a lot to be formulated with this. This is the beginning of the idea phase. And I, you know, piggyback on what Shonda said, this is not something that just the ANC could do. I feel strongly that the ANC should have leadership in this effort. You know, it is a local issue and it's a community issue, so we should have some leadership in it. But that particular network, we, you know, realize if it's something that's adopted, there's a lot of formalities that we have to discuss and negotiate, and the legal liability and the responding and reporting of information, who it goes to, even to your point, is the information being accurately reported. So I've worked on a law enforcement hotline, and I'm very, very familiar with all that. And I agree with you 100%. That is something that I raised early on in this process.
So these things should be incorporated into this recommendation to make it clear that whatever is stated in here really needs to account for the things that you just mentioned, Lisa.
Yes.
Okay.
No, that's great feedback, and it's well taken. And we will definitely incorporate the fact that there is continuing research that needs to be done. And we, in our task force, definitely realize that. And that's why we thought it was extremely important to have an ongoing work group to work on these issues. The work group also raised the issue of meeting with various agencies, even including the Metropolitan Police Department, to flesh these out. But as you know, 12 weeks is a limited time. And so that's why the presentation is tonight, but the work will continue and research.
Abe?
Before I ask my question, Cal S, was Cal part of your group?
Yes, thank you, Cal.
Is there, I think he's raising his hand,
Okay.
and do we want to let him speak, or is that?
Yes, I believe he wants to add, he worked along with Lisa Gore and Lisa Oakley on the idea for the Rapid Response Network.
Great. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Thank you.
We
I've
can
not
hear you.
been a participant in a webinar before. So I came up with this idea originally, and I think in our last call, we discussed the idea that we may not, and certainly initially, be able to do much more. And this is mostly to address Commissioner Malice's question. Do much more initially than decide where something should live. Like, who we refer this to handle this particular situation, rather than the community members, volunteers trying to do it themselves. Partly because of the training issues, partly because of qualifications. You know, we had a conversation, do we need to have a licensed therapist? And when we got to that point, we realized that maybe we were more likely just pointing the direction of where to go with this, rather than taking on solving the problems ourselves. And I hope that alleviates some of the concerns that you might have.
Thank you, Cal.
Thank you, Cal.
One question I have, or maybe it's not even a question, but something I've been sort of thinking over is, to me, in some ways, the biggest or most long-lasting recommendation here is that the creation of a permanent task force, because then you're setting up a structure and a group of people to do the work of the other recommendations, and hopefully recommendations beyond that. And I wonder if, and I know this is somewhat technical and nerdy, but here we go. If changing something in the bylaws of the ANC to really establish a standing committee that has certain requirements about how it reports back to the full ANC, who's on it, what its membership is and responsibilities, but really formalizing it and explaining how it would incorporate the community as well, could be some way that really this lives beyond any particular group of commissioners who may or may not be reelected. I mean, I'm very cognizant that only 2 of the 7 current commissioners are going to be on the ANC come January 1. And if we really want this to continue, I think the more structures we can put in place that are not specific to individuals, the better. And so I think that's one thought about, I think I would definitely encourage all of us to keep thinking about what structures can we set up. And that the reason I thought of that is it's really very clear that this group thought a lot about how they work together, just in the way you wrote your report and the way you presented and how you talked about Shonda's leadership and how you talked about the process, Lisa. I think given that this work is very new to a lot of people in a lot of places in the country, I would also encourage you to, where you can, like, memorialize what you've done that was successful, so that when hopefully this task force continues, people can really learn from that. Because I can imagine this is hard, emotional, difficult work sometimes that you engaged in over the last 12 weeks, and we want people to have learned from you. So 2 thoughts. I think let's make it structure that keeps it going as formal as we can and very clear, and let's try and memorialize, like, the lessons you learned from how you work together.
That's great. Thanks, Abe.
Jerry, you had a question?
Yeah, and I know we're running short of time for this group.
Okay.
So this is just one quick thing. Recommendations, I'm looking at my notes here. I think it's 4 and 5 state the same exact objective. So I don't think you really need two different recommendations. They're the same thing, almost word for word. You know, it makes it more readable if you have fewer things, and since these are related, you might want to do that. And related to that, the community, create a separate community center space. Obviously, you'd need to be working with whatever standing task force the ANC has for the community center, which I'm sure Chris and Randy have been on already, so they'll probably continue to be on it in the new term. But that would definitely be something that should be taken up within the community center task force.
Yes.
That raised the question that I had too about that is the new community center is not going to be, the money that we have for that now is not available until 2024. And so there's a long time between now and then. And I know we don't want to wait for that. You might think about ways to do that more urgently in the existing building or the library or somewhere in the existing structures, because we're really not going to have a new community center for 4 or 5 years at least.
Yeah.
Okay, I had one other question, and this is a broad question. Our ANC has been very active on policy and legislation issues before the council. We testify often at the council. And I think that's the role of the ANC. I think we ought to be communicating those kinds of things to the council. And it's a really good opportunity for us to let the council know what our community wants. I'm just thinking that this is a big undertaking, and especially on an issue that's before the council right now, and that's policing, for instance.
Yeah.
There are a lot of hearings that are going on and legislation being considered. And if the ANC takes that on, which I think we should, it's going to require a good bit of participation by the community, some help in just muscling this through, because there's going to be a lot of work to do. I'm testifying before the council, especially the way we do it, where we have a resolution that approves the testimony before we testify, so we testify on behalf of the entire commission. That takes a lot of planning and work. Not that we shouldn't be doing it, but it's just.
Yes, no, and you raised a good point.
That.
To that point, that is why we narrowed, at least initially, the policies that were concrete solutions or recommendations towards the issue of racial injustice. And specifically, you'll see in the draft report, there's the council's emergency legislation that dealt with justice issues, and they're going to be working on permanent legislation. There, as we found, and this goes to the group's request that there be a website, or the ANC's website be used as a resource. As a group, we literally had to comb different websites. There is no central repository in the District of Columbia today that can give you information on legislation of this sort. You literally had to put in racial justice or racial injustice. And so to the extent that our ANC and neighborhood could be on the forefront of keeping our residents apprised of certain things, I think that would be a great first step, having at least it on our website that this legislation is here, perhaps explaining it. And then ultimately later in advocacy supporting the ANC is a great step, because right now we don't have that in our city.
Right. Okay, well, I think we have exhausted the time that we've got available, not all the issues, but we've exhausted all the time. And so I think we probably need to move on to education. Gary and Lisa, thank you very much. And Cal and the whole group. I know all of you worked really hard on this, and we appreciate it. Shanda was a great leader. So Jerry, you want to introduce the education and health group?
Thank you. So the much like all the other groups, the education and health work group has been added since the June-July time period. And first, I'd like to introduce the members in alphabetical order, of course. Stacy Beck, Subrad Biswal, Jeffrey Coleman, Michael Gibbons, Aaron Gorman. One special note about Aaron as a high school student, he is by far the youngest member of this task force, and he brought us a much needed youth perspective to the work we've been doing. Peter Lynch, Judy Mays, and Chris Ott. And I believe they're all on this call, except for Jeffrey Coleman, who wasn't able to make it. So, that's outstanding as well. The presentation is going to be done by Michael Gibbons. And at this time, I'm taking off my work group hat and putting on my commissioner hat. So I'll be letting the members of the work group respond to questions because, you know, as the community volunteers, and as everybody knows, it's a tremendous job to do this, and volunteer your time, volunteer attending meetings and all of that. So I'm going to let them shine and speak to any questions that come up. So I'll turn it over to Michael right now.
Thank you, Jerry, and thank you to all the commissioners and to Abe for pulling me in. This is the Health and Education Working Group. We addressed 5 issues, and I'll outline why they're important issues and what we recommend about each. So just an introduction: in an increasingly prosperous, gentrifying, and unequal city and region, race-based health and education disparities across neighborhoods in the district persist despite some recent pre-pandemic progress in closing the gap. In our Chevy Chase neighborhood, the legacy of segregation, the relatively high cost of housing, and income levels limit internal disparities, but position us at the privileged end of the disparities between our community and others across the city. So that's what we have to work to change as a default situation. The first issue we dealt with was equalizing school financing. Why is this an important issue? So education financing levels have a direct impact on student academic achievement, according to a wide range of credible studies cited in our report. Since the schools in DC were desegregated in 1954, efforts have been made to even out municipal funding allocations across schools. And currently, DCPS funding formula draws together equal per pupil allocations to schools by enrollment and a number of other state and federal funding programs based on student needs, family income levels, and other factors. But nonetheless, persistent economic disparities between schools still persist. And one key exacerbating factor is private fundraising by parent-teacher organizations, which vary considerably by income level of school communities. So this is a recognized problem in Ward 3 and in the primary schools that feed up into Deal and Wilson schools. In our report, we outline some of the specifics of this situation in our local schools. Recently, members overwhelmingly approved a Lafayette HSA recommendation called the Fundraising Equity Pledge to allocate 10% of annually raised HSA funds, around $15,000 a year, to the DC Public Education Fund that distributes funds to schools with funding gaps. Our working group considers this a first step, but encourages more that we recommend. We would encourage creating an ANC-wide mechanism, which we think could sit conveniently under the proposed Racial Justice Task Force, that would raise money specifically for schools with funding gaps outside our ANC boundaries, that could provide volunteer resources to assist these schools to raise more money, raise more of their own funds, and eventually could work with others to help build local school fundraising capability. The second issue we dealt with is deepening racial justice curriculum and learning in our local school. And note, this issue was recommended and initially drafted by Aaron, our Wilson High School student member. Why is this an important issue? Well, the children in our community at Lafayette School grew up largely isolated from the historic majority Black experiences of racism and segregation common across DC, and therefore with a limited understanding of Black history, race-based privilege, and the need for anti-racist orientation and learning. In supporting our families to bring up children sensitized to these issues is an important concern. There are several reasons why our children are isolated from those things, and they're outlined in detail in our report. Over the past 20 years, non-white, out-of-boundary student enrollment at Lafayette School has varied considerably and is currently very limited. And attention to Black history, culture, and lived experience in the school curriculum and culture has also varied over time, according to the testimony of past parents and Aaron in our working group. Recently, however, DCPS has launched a new social studies curriculum task force, which is working now to emphasize Black history and racism and to encourage anti-racism and anti-bias perspectives and practices in our school social studies program. And Lafayette School itself has made significant new efforts to deepen and sharpen a racial justice focus through projects, activities, and a richer reading list, details of which are outlined in our report. We believe these steps are positive and constitute a good starting point to build on. So we recommend at Lafayette School engagement with school and parent leadership to review current efforts underway, to add more Black history and anti-racism themed books into the required reading list for all grades as part of the school's reading program, and support for more professional development for staff in culturally responsive and anti-racist teaching. At the DCPS level, we would recommend to the current DCPS Social Studies Revision Task Force new programs for students in predominantly white neighborhoods and schools to learn about racism, Black history, and how to practice anti-racism, and new programs that bring school communities from different DC neighborhoods together to do joint activities in each other's neighborhoods and learn from each other. The third issue area is fostering greater community engagement to promote equity across DCPS schools. So this would complement the community mobilization that was just proposed by the earlier group. Why is this an important issue? Organizing and engagement around racial justice issues in DC is underway, and education equity work could use further support. Given our racial segregation and isolation, we in our ANC Ward 3 need to reach outside the area to join forces with others to address inequality in DC public schools. And a key anti-racist ally practice is engaging with and listening to the most affected people to understand better what needs to be done. So we recommend an effort to consult with individuals and groups across the city working on education equity, including ANC residents in our neighborhood, school networks within our ANC and ward, feeding up into Wilson School, local education groups from all wards, other ANC commissioners, the State Board of Education, and DCPS's community action teams. We would recommend, based on that consultation, preparing quarterly reports with recommendations for advancing education equity in DCPS that could guide local community members' efforts to support that work. The fourth issue we highlighted is encouraging efforts to close educational technology gaps. The pandemic, and why is this issue important? The pandemic shutdown has revealed how essential digital access is to equitable student learning. Digital education access, however, is not so simple. It involves many things: funded internet connections, enabled devices, English proficiency, disability adaptations as needed, digital literacy, family support. And family differences across these items can complicate efforts to ensure equal access and participation. The current digital education access gap in DC is significant between white and non-white families, according to a set of recent studies cited in our report, including internet connection and broadband access gaps, and actually levels of actual online participation in instruction online this spring. This year, according to our research, DCPS and supporters in the city mobilized several efforts to close this gap. DCPS purchased and distributed thousands of devices and hotspots in the spring and in the fall. The DC Education Equity Fund raised $2 million for schools in need around technology. And at Lafayette, the HSA recently authorized funds for devices for teachers and students in need before DCS supplies were made available. So we would recommend several additional steps to augment these efforts. In local schools, we'd like to learn from parents and students in the neighborhood experiencing technology problems, what obstacles limit access and what remedies they suggest. We would recommend producing a short report outlining current technology gap closing activities underway in Lafayette, Deal, and Wilson schools, how these meet and do not meet local student needs. And we would engage in school leadership and HSAs about how to move from short-term pandemic response to sustained assurance that all students have full working access to learning technology, as blended learning using face-to-face learning and online is likely to continue going forward. And with DCPS, we propose organizing a group to produce a synthesis report within 3 months outlining current technology gaps, remedies underway across the city, and recommendations to permanently close the education technology gap, including advocacy with the DC Council about broadband access across the whole city. The last issue we highlighted is expanding evidence-based social emotional learning programs in DCPS schools. Why is this important? Studies cited in our report affirm that to be successful in school and at home in a diverse school, community, and city, social emotional skills and mindfulness are essential qualities. And while all children benefit from SEL, social emotional learning, Black and Latinx children face unique social and emotional challenges posed by structural racism and limited access to appropriate health care, making SEL particularly important in schools serving children of color. Lafayette Elementary School developed several years ago a unique evidence-based SEL program called Peace of Mind with HSA financial support that illustrates what might be possible. Details of positive evaluations and a pilot expansion of this program to 3 other schools are described in our report. The Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, a national NGO, evaluates evidence-based SEL programs like our Lafayette program and can serve as a resource to DCPS. So we recommend engaging DCPS and the school chancellor to study the feasibility of implementing evidence-based SEL programs like the one we have at Lafayette in other schools, and testifying with the state board and DCPS about the details of the Lafayette program and how it's evolving under pilot conditions as an example of what is possible. And I'll note that like the other working group, we don't contemplate that the ANC commissioners would be doing this work, but that a standing racial justice working group or task force would be invited to consider our recommendations and the recommendations of the other working groups and to prioritize among them those that can be done year on year as examples of our contribution to racial justice work in the city and in our neighborhood. Thanks. So I think at this point we'll open for questions, and I would welcome colleagues from my working group who worked on different sections of this to jump in if there are questions related to different sections.
Commissioners, you have questions?
Yes, I'll jump in.
Shanda.
First, I'd like to commend you all of your committee members on all of your work. It's a great presentation. It seems like you narrowed down, which I'm sure was a huge area to focus on. I have questions in 2 areas. The first one is related to the funding equity issue and your idea about the ANC getting into that framework. What is the rationale for, I know that Lafayette, if I'm correct, has their PTA has donated funding to various networks across the city in terms of funding. But in your research, what I guess briefly, like, how did you identify that as a priority? On the first one. The second one, it just goes to the technology issue. I wholeheartedly agree that there are, in our city, there's a technological disparity for the kids, and your recommendations on that are spot on, even within our neighborhood. So just if you could talk a little bit about those two.
Jerry, are you going to stay in your commission space, even though you helped to draft that first one? Do you want me to respond?
Without doing anything but giving you some of the facts about that, which I have no problem doing. There's, throughout DCPS, there's some public schools, not just necessarily the ones in our ANC, there's some schools that raise upwards of $400,000 through their associations, and there are many more that do not exceed $100. That money then becomes something that changes all those funding formulas that are trying to equalize things for per pupil funding throughout DC, and allow some schools such as Lafayette to create these programs that we talked about, peace of mind being one of them, and other things. And that creates its own sense of imbalance among the public schools, and trying to equalize that community-driven, that's what it's called in the report, community-driven funding for those schools to give some of what the certain schools are able to collect and really share the wealth is what it's all about to others. It gives those schools a chance to implement some of the programs that really get no funding from the district, and enables them to take advantage of some of these opportunities.
Any other, Abe?
Two thoughts. I think one, I would first just echo, well, I guess three thoughts. One, I would echo what Commissioner Tuck Garfield said. Thank you for clearly presenting this. Thank you to the task force and working group members for working on this, for thinking about these issues, for writing and researching. I appreciate all the footnotes. And I think similar to the first group, this is the second point, similar to the first group, it sounds like there's the thinking here that there's an ongoing task force that should be taking on this work. That could be made up of some commissioners, but also community members, and would do the work of implementing these and other recommendations. And so I'd encourage your working group to maybe put down some and memorialize some thoughts on what the structures of that group itself could be. That you met every 2 weeks was a good cadence. That you had chairs and they took on these roles, but what are the structures and how did you kind of figure it out so that whoever's doing this over the next years doesn't start from scratch, and it isn't dependent on it being individual people in your group. So that, Michael, you can bring your expertise, but if you need to step away, the group has a really clear structure for how to operate. In the 4 years on the ANC, I've really found the structures of this ANC to be really helpful to me in understanding how this place works and for us to get things done. So that's what the one point. The other point, and full disclosure, I work at KIF DC, the city's largest public charter school network. So I do bring a certain perspective. I don't usually talk about that, but it's relevant here. I don't see much mention about students who attend public charter schools. In the district, 47% of students attend a public charter school, including many students who live in our ANC. While there are no charter schools in our ANC, there are students who attend those schools. And so I think I'm not advocating for a specific set of recommendations that only apply to public charter schools, but I think I would encourage the working group to go back through the report and think about, to say if we're talking about DCPS and charter schools, if we're thinking about the agencies to work with, the State Board of Education, the DC Council, and the Public Charter School Board. And I think I would hate for someone to read this and think that, this working group is not interested in the needs of those 40 to 50,000 students, because I imagine you are. So that's my second point.
Thanks, Abe. Yeah, I think we were referring to DCPS, DC Public Schools as, as far as I understand, legally speaking, charter schools are public schools in the way things have been arranged in DC. So that's how we were assuming to be inclusive, as opposed to solely limiting our focus to DC traditional existing neighborhood public schools. So I think, we can clean that up, and I think we would want to be definitely inclusive.
Well, could I need to respond to that. One of the reasons initially that we did that is because DC public schools are organized as a unified system, where charter school is independently run. KIPP has several of them.
Yeah.
Charter school is independently run. So anything that was said about DCPS can immediately go to those 53,000 kids in DCPS, but the charter schools need to be really dealt with. Even during this pandemic, they can each do whatever they want to do. They're not necessarily following DCPS, and there are a lot of guidelines. So it's easier to deal with a unified whole than it is to deal with many pieces that operate independently. And that's the reason that it was done that way. Not that those kids don't count. The kids that go to private schools in DC are a large percentage also. And in this area, a lot of kids go to private schools. So it was really that thinking that drove the group to DCPS. No, the charter schools or private schools at all.
Pretty good.
Shanda?
Okay, I have another question. Your recommendations are great, and you have a number of them. What I would recommend, and it's not really clear in the draft, is what action steps are you specifically recommending that the ANC take, and what action steps would be the responsibility of an ongoing permanent task force group? Like, for instance, to give an example, on the anti-racism curriculum, is there more work that could be done by the task force or the ANC? Like, for instance, should the ANC pass a resolution on this issue? It seems to, this is just one of the examples, but I guess just adding those points for action in the future.
That's very helpful in an edit. I think it would be helpful to kind of parse out a little bit. It may be helpful where some of those advocacy steps with DCPS or State Board of Education or encouragement of charter schools might benefit from an ANC resolution if that were appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, actions that are programmatic or engaging with other mechanisms might involve the Racial Justice Task Force as an action agent. So going into the next drafts, we would try to clarify that. That's a really helpful suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Just real quick, Randy, if I may, there was one thing I wanted to follow up on about the point I was asking about earlier.
Okay.
I think, just to be really clear, I understand that there are some difficulties in terms of there's not one central governing body that tells charter schools do this or that. There's not a chancellor per se for the public charter schools. But I think even like on 3, when it's talking about fundraising, money should be raised knowing that a substantial designated percentage will go to other schools within DCPS. And so I think, there is a limiting there to say that there's only a focus on this one school system that does serve the majority of students, but doesn't serve all students. And so I think if we're thinking about how to sort of spread the wealth, as Michael, I think, was saying earlier, I would want to say, I would want that to read, for example, we'll go to other schools within the district and to be broader. And does it not matter what type of school they attend?
Well, not private schools.
Well, and I think, and okay, then maybe, but so there's some discussion there.
Right.
And so I think that is what I think about that. That's an example. And so I think if, yeah, so that's an example that I would call out specifically. But I think more broadly, I see very little mention of the students who attend these schools. And so I would encourage the working group to think about finding ways to include those students too.
Thank you.
And I guess to that point, you mentioned the private schools. I know that there's like the Black Student Fund within, and I'm sure you all may or may not be familiar with it, but it basically supports students from all around the district and gives them the ability to attend any school that they want, primarily private schools. So I don't know if your group looked at partnering with organizations such as that on, there's also Latino Student Fund in the city as well, but mainly the Black Student Fund in terms of resources and funding for kids around the district. I saw you mentioned some groups, but not specifically those.
Thank you.
Okay, we're really running out of time. We've gone way over on both of the previous presentations. I did have one little point that I would urge you to look at, and we've neglected this in our work with various government agencies, but I don't think we've had a good enough relationship with the State Board of Education. And we've got two active, dedicated, thoughtful board members from Ward 3 and Ward 4, who I know some of us have gotten acquainted with, but I don't think we've taken as active a role with the State Board of Education as we could. And that I think could be very helpful.
Agreed.
Okay, I think we do need to go on to the next presentation, and we're going to run past 9 o'clock tonight, I can tell. The next group is the housing group. Abe, you want to ask, elevate Connie and Sarah and Ron. Ron is just going to be the one handling the visuals, because we have visuals. Again, I will echo the words that Jerry and Shanda did as well. That this is an extraordinarily dedicated group of people who's been working tirelessly for the last 12 weeks and has done a really fantastic job. I will let Sarah and Connie introduce themselves and the group in one of their visuals, and then I'll just turn it over to them. Sarah, I think you're going to begin.
Yep. Ron, if you want to share your screen, I'm ready to go.
Abe, I'm not able to share my screen. Okay.
You should be able to now.
Yeah.
All right, you ready, Ron?
Yeah.
All right. So thank you all for coming tonight. We are the Housing Work Group. I am Sarah Remus, and I'll be co-presenting tonight with Connie Chang. Our other members are Libby Martin, Cal Simone, Judy Mays, Ron Eichner, and Randy Speck. Our task was to explore ways to begin to reverse the exclusionary practices of the past by encouraging a variety of housing options that will be attainable for residents with a wider range of incomes and backgrounds. Why are we here tonight? We are proud of our neighborhood, but cognizant of its racist past, and we need to have a conversation about changes we can make in order to make our neighborhood more accessible and available for all. Black residents, of course, have always been cognizant of the racism they face. But the inequalities exacerbated by COVID and the recent Black Lives Matter protests have made more white residents aware, making this a necessary conversation at this time. The disparities in DC between white and Black are huge, and also between Ward 3 and the rest of the city. Ward 3 is 72% white and 7% Black, compared to the district as a whole, which is 37% white and 44% Black. In 2016 in DC, the median white household wealth, not income, but total assets, was $284,000 compared to the median Black household wealth of only $3,500. This dramatically impacts the housing that people can afford. The map on this slide shows the racial demographics throughout the city, with our neighborhood in dark blue because it is overwhelmingly white. As will be discussed throughout this presentation, this pattern came about through racially exclusionary laws and are being maintained by facially neutral, race-neutral laws that have both disparate impact and intent. First, a historical tour through the racism that created our segregated neighborhood. Chevy Chase used to have Black families, but prior to the development of the streetcar that made this neighborhood more desirable for white families, there were at least 2 thriving Black neighborhoods, one at the current site of Lafayette School and Park, and the other at Fort Reno. Using different mechanisms, both were cleared of Black residents in order to make more space for white homeowners and the schools their children needed. We literally live and go to school on land that would belong to Black families, but for the active efforts of a white-run government. Chevy Chase, like many neighborhoods, was created by laws that explicitly or implicitly banned Black residents. Beginning in 1935, the Federal Housing Administration subsidized private developers by underwriting loans, but only as long as those developers excluded Black families from their developments. Banks then drew maps that defined the rates at which they would lend money. This procedure, known as redlining, incentivized developers to build all-white neighborhoods and made it far more expensive for Black families to get mortgages. The redlining map, shown here, looks eerily familiar to the map a couple slides ago that shows the current racial makeup of neighborhoods. Restrictive covenants and explicitly racist exclusionary zoning laws were also used to forbid Blacks and other minorities from buying houses in white neighborhoods. When they were found to be legally unenforceable, cities instead turned to exclusionary zoning that were race neutral on their face, but had both a disparate impact and intent. The Supreme Court found that they were constitutional in the 1970s, and they continue today in the form of zoning laws that, in our neighborhood, mandate single-family houses. Even though laws have changed, current practices reinforce our segregated neighborhood. The problems we need to fix are not merely historical, they are still happening today. Current politicians use suburbs' alleged desire to stay all white to foment division. The wealth gap I mentioned earlier largely exists because of the segregated and continuing segregation. Reverse redlining, in which Black families are less likely to qualify for traditional loans and more likely to receive subprime loans despite their creditworthiness, is a barrier to home buying, especially in expensive neighborhoods. Investigative journalism has uncovered practices of realtors steering Black families away from traditionally white neighborhoods, and appraisers undervaluing Black-owned homes. Zoning laws that make all houses in a neighborhood expensive make them off limits to populations who have not been able to build wealth, are not able to access low-interest mortgages, and must sell their houses for less than their value.
We could continue living our lives as if this history does not matter, because we can regard ourselves as good people who aren't actively denying another person an opportunity to live here if they so choose. But complacency is a corrosive factor contributing to today's injustices. The legacy of past institutionalized practices of discrimination is our present lack of choices in housing types, limited range of home prices, lack of affordable housing, and limited diversity in neighborhood demographics. While we cannot change a history of discrimination based on race and religion in housing decisions, we can look at the legacy of those decisions, understand that they have an adverse impact, and choose to act now to correct them or mitigate those impacts. This graph shows that wards 3 and 4, which is Rock Creek West, have the lowest supply of affordable housing in the district. This next graph shows that compared to other wards, we aren't adding any new affordable housing in Ward 3. The fact is, affordable housing in Ward 3 is extremely limited, and without any action on our part, it will continue to be so. Modest incremental measures can begin to reverse that past discrimination and permit a broader range of residents to share the benefits of living in our community. Our work group focused on increasing significantly the supply of attainable and affordable housing while building on the unique character of our Main Street and its surrounding neighborhoods. Increasing available options for housing can broaden opportunities in our neighborhood to include lower income families from diverse backgrounds, retirees and those who choose to downsize and age in place, recent college graduates paying off student loan debt, single parent families whose resources are stretched, first responders and other government employees who cannot afford to live near their work, and first-time homebuyers. We acknowledge that our neighborhood has been shaped by race-based policies and decisions that excluded Black residents and prevented them from sharing its benefits. Our 7 recommendations are designed to address that historical inequity. I will share each one in turn. Details can be found in our draft report submitted to the ANC and posted on the website. Recommendation 1, we support the ANC's proposal earlier this year to develop significant affordable and workforce housing as part of the modernization of the publicly owned Chevy Chase Community Center and the Chevy Chase Neighborhood Library. We see this combined campus as the town center, the heart, if you will, of the ANC recommended Chevy Chase Gateway. The strategy of co-locating mixed income housing and public services, building affordable housing above a library or a community center, has ample precedence in other cities. We understand that the Office of Planning's small area plan is expected to flesh out this proposal to provide a minimum of 50% income restricted affordable housing, family-sized units, and opportunities for residents' ownership. We welcome a broad-based effort to finance such a development that includes the district government, nonprofit entities, private investment, and community members to make affordable housing a reality and to provide accessible choices for district residents who have been overtly excluded from living in their neighborhood. The Office of Planning's small area planning process provides a unique opportunity to shape future mixed-use, moderate density development along the Chevy Chase Gateway. Small area plans can establish a community vision and a specific framework for future development. They become part of the DC's comprehensive plan, and any zoning or other development actions must be consistent with that plan. The current Safeway, Wells Fargo Bank, and WMATA bus depot are potential sites for low-density commercial, moderate density residential buildings. Inclusionary zoning is a tool already in place to require a proportion of new units to be set aside for lower income tenants or owners. We suggest that the small area planning process includes a charrettes with broad participation by all potential stakeholders to explore how best to incorporate affordable housing into new development and to integrate these modest projects into our neighborhood. Some of our neighborhoods' existing housing stock is either naturally affordable based on market forces or is subject to rent control. You know, the buildings south of Livingston Street along Connecticut Avenue. We weren't able to locate a database that identifies and classifies these units. We propose that this data be collected and made publicly accessible and that it is used to ensure equitable availability. It is also essential that these rental units continue to be affordable while also ensuring that they will be well maintained. Recommendation 4, the district last updated its rental control law in 1985. It should be modernized to address today's conditions. The number of rent-controlled units in the district has declined significantly, and more than a quarter of all renters pay more than 50% of their income on rent and utilities. significantly above 30%, which is considered affordable. Although DC Council has considered reforms, it has not acted on proposed new legislation that would increase the number of units subject to rent control and limit exemptions and adjustments. We recommend that the ANC urge the Council to enact reasonable reforms. Older neighborhoods that developed organically often had a mix of housing types: single-family homes next to duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes. There were a range of houses between those with one family and larger multifamily apartment buildings. Some progressive cities have begun to permit this missing middle housing that disappeared with the advent of exclusionary zoning. The look and feel of the neighborhood can be maintained through form-based codes that include resident input and allow some diversity in the way buildings look, while maintaining the architectural character of the neighborhood, as you can see in some of these photos. By design, a multifamily house should be more affordable, but the district should establish criteria and incentives to promote affordability should we introduce missing middle into our neighborhood. Recommendation 6. Since 2016, the district has permitted accessory dwelling units, ADUs as they're known, granny flats, carriage houses, and garage conversions are ADUs, but they have not caught on because of challenges and issues created by the complex approval process. ADUs have real potential to address some affordable housing needs in our predominantly single-family zoned neighborhood by allowing homeowners to reduce the cost of ownership by providing a source of income, allowing empty nesters to stay in the neighborhood while renting their larger home to a young family, providing an affordable housing option, and allowing older residents to bring in a caretaker or downsize. The impact of ADUs is potentially significant. Rock Creek West currently has 17,700 single family homes. If only 14% of these homes created an ADU, 2,500 new homes would become immediately available. We recommend the ANC urge the district to streamline the permitting, licensing, and zoning process for development and incentivize residents to take advantage of it. Our last recommendation, number 7. The Federal Housing Choice Voucher Program provides rent subsidies for qualified participants so that tenants pay no more than 1/3 of their income for housing. Such vouchers can bring more families into affordable housing in Chevy Chase. In some cases, however, landlords are wary of accepting voucher recipients. In other cases, tenants are not meeting the standards required under their leases with landlords. The task force recommends working with the district to ensure that those tenants already placed receive additional services in order to satisfactorily comply with lease requirements. Landlords can then be encouraged to accept more voucher tenants in existing area buildings. So these are our 7 recommendations. Our neighborhood's history of exclusion, both implicit and structural, calls for action to prevent its perpetuation. The mayor has challenged us to do our part by adding close to 2,000 new affordable housing in wards 3 and 4, Rock Creek West, by 2025. Unlike those who lived 100 years before us, diversity, equity, and racial justice can serve as our guiding values. We believe this can be accomplished while preserving all the best of our existing neighborhood and without adversely affecting home values, safety, and environmental standards. Adding more density at transit-oriented and transit-rich neighborhoods like ours is almost universally seen as the most environmentally sound way to build. It means less sprawl, less auto traffic, more transit use, and critically for the environment, less carbon. The housing work group does not have all the answers. As mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we were tasked to explore ways to begin to reverse the exclusionary housing practices of the past by encouraging a variety of housing options that will be attainable for residents with a wider range of incomes and backgrounds. Creating meaningful, affordable housing must be a multi-pronged, multi-year sustained effort to be successful. The wider community will need to be involved in every step. Both government and private resources will have to be marshaled to achieve the common objective of a more diverse, inclusive community. Tonight's meeting and sharing our work with the ANC is but the first step forward. We look forward to addressing your questions. Thank you so much.
Okay, Ron, I think probably we need to take the sharing down because I need to be able to see the other commissioners. Great, thank you. Okay, Connie and Sarah, thank you very much, and Ron for doing the video presentation. Okay, we'll open up to questions. Jerry.
First, I just want to say you should take this show on the road. That was a great presentation. Really, it was super. It really was. So I applaud you for that. I'll start off with one comment just to kick things off. I would like to have some mention in there about using, at least encouraging, but preferably using nonprofit developers for these affordable housing places that we have that you've mentioned on Connecticut Avenue. So Others Might Eat has been getting involved in affordable housing throughout the district, and the organization, there are other organizations. I'm not sure what it is. I think CNHED is a nonprofit that deals with affordable housing throughout DC. And I would really like to see, instead of having private for-profit developers come in and do things, to really take advantage of some of these groups that, that they have a more vested interest in accomplishing some of the things that you're talking about. And to piggyback on that, I know you mentioned Safeway and the community library and Wells Fargo and the bus turnout, all of which I think are great places. I would even go so far as to suggest that DC could absolutely buy the land where Wells Fargo is, and then let Wells Fargo, if it's going to be a mixed-use building, they could rebuild their bank in the lobby of such a building or in the main floor of that. And I think that would be a win-win for both organizations. So unfortunately, WMATA seems to want to redo the bus turnout for some reason, but that too, I think, is a prime location. Locations like this and like Safeway, that parking lot and Safeway, we have some tremendous areas there that we could do some great things with mixed use, affordable and workforce housing. And I really think that it would drive the point home by encouraging nonprofit developers rather than for-profit developers to be the ones that usher that in. And thank you again. It was a great presentation.
So we definitely agree with you. One of the experts that we consulted in writing this report was Habitat for Humanity, and we discussed that in at least perhaps above the library and community center, at least some of the units be available for purchase for people who meet income guidelines, and that's something that Habitat specializes in. We didn't think it was appropriate in a report that might be adopted by an arm of the government, as the ANC is, to call out specific nonprofits. But we definitely agree with you that that having nonprofit developers with expertise in this is desirable.
Great, thank you.
Chris.
Yeah, let me just say I'm 100% behind the effort to upzone Connecticut Avenue and build, moderate density, affordable housing up and down the avenue. I think the site where the library and the community center should be 100% affordable workforce housing. And I think the other buildings should maybe be 50% affordable workforce housing. I think inclusionary zoning has been a flop in the fact that there's hardly any affordable people in those buildings. It's all high income folks, like 5333. The one thing that I'm dead against, though, this has to be modest and incremental change, as you said. And I think wiping out single family zoning throughout Chevy Chase is going to cause, it's going to cause a lot of upset in the neighborhood. I realize that some of these neighborhoods were set up to be, you know, segregated neighborhood. My house had a covenant on it. I couldn't have lived there because people of Jewish descent weren't allowed to live in that house. But that doesn't mean that you throw away the whole neighborhood. And I disagree with your, even though you had a great presentation, a floor flat next to a single family house changes the whole neighborhood. You got you get 4 families of cars. You know, one of the pictures you showed was the 4 flat next to a single family house. Oh, doesn't this look nice? But the whole front yard of the 4 flat was parked cars. The front of the house, the other house was green and trees. It's a whole different type of neighborhood. And, you know, I think what we ought to do is concentrate on developing Connecticut Avenue, which I think is very possible. It's supported by the city. It's supported by the planning department. That's not going to be supported by the neighborhood either, by the way. But I think we probably could, you know, because you haven't seen the uproar when you try to put housing on the library site. But I think we could probably get that by. But if you try to build, you know, housing up and down Connecticut, and plus all through the neighborhoods, you know, we're all going to be out of office, to be honest with you. And, you know, so I think we have to consider those things. And I would like to see affordable housing on Connecticut Avenue and development, Connecticut Avenue. So let's mention the upzoning of the residential neighborhoods, but, you know, that's something that could happen after everybody accepts the upzoning of Connecticut Avenue, and we see how that works. I just think it's going to cause too many problems in the neighborhood. And if it stays in the report, I'm going to vote against the report.
So I hear your concerns around increased density, especially increased cars. We want to emphasize that the regulations that we kept reminding ourselves as we wrote this report that we are not the urban design committee. And so regulations that maintain the building height, how far from the property line they need to be, all of those other regulations that control the look and design of a house would remain. Certainly there are houses that are much bigger and not of the style that I would prefer, that are currently being built. And so having, say, a duplex doesn't have to mean that it's bigger than houses that are currently allowed. But I definitely hear you on concerns around cars. And one of the reasons, though, that we put that recommendation in is right now we are, if we only did the affordable housing on Connecticut Avenue, we would be a neighborhood of over $1 million houses where only people with sufficient wealth to buy those houses could live, while on the other hand, affordable housing where only people who make less than a certain amount of the median income, a certain percentage of the median income could live, which would create a very barbelled neighborhood. And I'm not sure that a barbelled neighborhood like that is healthy.
I'm not saying that Connecticut Avenue should be all affordable housing. I mean, Connecticut Avenue should be a mixture of wealthy housing and affordable housing. But the problem with, you know, building, just take a duplex, for example. The R2 neighborhood, they just built a duplex on Martin. They tore down a single family house. They built a gigantic duplex, and each one is $2 million. So how is that affordable? And if you're going to build a fourplex, you think they're going to build a 4-unit apartment building in Chevy Chase and charge, you know, low rents? Those things are going to rent for thousands and thousands of dollars. So there needs to be more mechanisms than just upzoning a neighborhood. I mean, I'm an architect, so I've been doing this for 45 years. You're not going to put a 6-unit house on my lot and keep all the setbacks the way they are. It's going to have to, something's going to have to give. It's going to have to be taller. It's going to, you know, it just doesn't work. So you guys, you know, it's not that easy. And you know, and there could be areas where you could put, you know, denser developments, like that Episcopal school over on Nebraska. Now there's a giant lot that comes up. You know, maybe that's a spot where you could do a townhouse development or some kind of development there, which is a little denser. And if the city was, you know, put in some money, maybe that could be made for moderate income or workforce housing. But just to just to upzone. You know what's going to happen if we upzone the neighborhood? Every developer in that knows that's worth his salt is going to be buying the houses and tearing them down and putting up apartment buildings. I mean, you could tear down my house and put up three units because I live on an 8,000 foot lot. So I mean, what's that going to get you? I just think it's going to be chaos. So this has to be done very slowly.
Before we go on, let me just mention, as Connie said, this would go in if we consider it at all. And all we're saying is that this is something that should be considered. It would only be if you had some protections to make sure that it was going to be affordable. We're not interested in having those $1 million, $2 million duplexes either. But if you can do things through incentives, maybe tax breaks and things like that, where you can ensure that it is going to actually be affordable, then I think this is something worth looking at. We're not suggesting that tomorrow we should change the single family zoning. What we're saying is, like in some other cities, we should be looking at this. And they're even looking at it in suburban Maryland and suburban Virginia. So we ought to think about it.
Okay, well, I'm thinking about it.
Well, that leads me to my comment. And while I think this is excellent, you definitely dived into the substantive issue. It shows just how much and how complex this issue is. And within the 12 weeks, you all have certainly, you should be commended for taking that deep dive because you clearly are experts and know in this area. But as a commissioner, we have to represent the entire community, and looking at the genesis of this task force and looking at concrete action steps, I have 3 points or 3 things I want to see. For me, I think I would need more clarity on the action steps that you want from the ANC. Specifically zoning, how any zoning, our ANC, we have, as you know, great weight, which means that we cannot ourselves change the law. So you have great recommendations, and practically, and you said you want modest incremental change, and you've identified the areas within housing. So within these areas, what is it that you want the ANC to do, you recommend for us, and what steps, not only what we do, but what are those incremental steps? Is this a 1-year plan, a 2-year plan, a 3-year? Like, what are you recommending in the short term versus the long term? And then the next point goes to, we've arrived at the point where you're having the substance discussion, but the background piece to it. You've identified these as important. What is it? And yes, the map shows, and we all know our neighborhood is majority higher income, majority white. So within that background and these recommendations, how did you arrive at that? I mean, like this clarity within each recommendation. And then
I'm not sure I understand that.
When you say, like, for instance, you've gotten to the point where you're saying, you know, Chris is talking about, yes, development on the corridor versus different types of consideration in the housing portion. And then within that, you know, there's a lot of housing lingo, and that takes me to my third point, like background. I think maybe a step that was mentioned in this is community education around these substantive points. Like, I was looking in the report of the, you know, maybe I didn't see it and it's, you know, quite long, affordable housing. How are you defining it?
There's a glossary. There's a glossary at the end.
Yes, yes. So I'm getting to that. But what affordable housing may mean to us in this part of DC may mean something else in another part of DC. And our target market, the income, and while you had that, like, we have, you know, African-American or people of color of all income levels and different affordability. I'm a testament to that as one individual. So the ultimate goal is, have your customer, and I think this was, you know, just a thought, like, what are we diversifying for? Are you looking for different income levels across, you know, African-Americanness, or what? Just like kind of diving into that, which wasn't clear. I guess we kind of or just diversity in general, because I'm thinking diversity and equity. So to maybe back up a step and just have an educational point in your recommendations would be helpful. Do you see what I'm getting at here? Because I think there's certain assumptions within this that are not expressly put out there. And I didn't know exactly where you were going with that.
I think this is addressing your point, although I'm not sure. As far as we know, the government can't have explicitly racial, let's bring in people of X race. That's just not something that the government.
Right, I know that. I'm a lawyer. I know, right.
And so we were hoping that the community group would make recommendations that make this neighborhood friendlier to people of all races and all cultures. But that's not something that we can do through housing mechanisms.
Right.
And so instead, we focused on making it more affordable. Certainly, averages are not everyone. There are poor people of every race and rich people of every race and in the middle of every race. So averages are only averages. But the wealth gap in this city is astronomical.
Yes,
and wealth, even more than income, affects the kind of house that a family can afford to buy.
Right. No, I get that. But I guess in the report, I'm asking for clarification on that piece. Like, what is it that the ANC, right? Are we advocating within our community that, Habitat for Humanity come in and educate or do work or partner or build things? Or are we saying that you want us to mainly work with the city, the mayor's office, et cetera, on these steps? And what should our first step be? Because just because we create it here, you may build it and they may not come. So
Shanda, if I could, on that one point, one of the things we suggest with the charrette that would be used to identify what it is we ought to be building there, is that charrette would include people of lower income, the target group, in other words, so that they would be involved in the planning process as well. And also we can rely on, as Jerry pointed out, the nonprofits who have a lot of experience in recruiting people to come, finding people who are interested in going to a neighborhood that has a lot of benefits like we have here. And so I think we could work with a variety of nonprofits who are quite expert in this. And I don't think we can necessarily rely on them entirely, because this is going to require some substantial financing too. I mean, the financing aspect of this is going to be considerable, especially if we're going to have very large percentages of affordable housing. It's going to be a challenge to raise money for it.
So I guess for me, clarity in terms of the action steps and the partnerships and also just the definitional, and maybe it is in the glossary in the back, but just when you're reading it in the front, something that kind of brings that together for a novice, in this area. Right, because everyone in our neighborhood is not as well versed as you all are. And maybe our commission is on these.
We weren't 12 weeks ago either.
Yes, right. But you're great now. You're spot on. But and it is a lot to chew for the commission. So what concrete action steps and what can we do in the short term versus long term? Because it is a lot, and there are a number of recommendations.
That's a great idea. We didn't prioritize or think short versus long. That's a great idea.
But thank you all. Thank you.
Jerry?
Before I go a second time, Abe hasn't gone yet.
Okay. Abe, do you have something?
Sure. thank you. I think, first of all, Thank you for presenting this so clearly. Thank you for telling a story, and I think also just doing some serious education about the history of this place, which I think as an educator, that's very important for people to know, and I think really informs what happens next. I think this is an emotional issue, potentially more so than the other two work groups. I think, and you said essentially a structure existed that privileged a group of people, and it looked like this with housing. Now we want it to look differently.
Right.
And I do think that that causes people to worry about what they're going to lose or what they perceive they may lose. And that's a reasonable and realistic fear. And on this ANC, when we've talked about there've been a number of times where people's property has been impeded on, or the city has proposed impeding on people's property in some way, and that has caused significant upset, whether it's something like slow streets recently, sidewalks, bioretention swales, or parking permits. Those are issues that impede on people's ability to do what they want with the land they consider theirs. And I think your group is working with that. So I would just encourage you to continue to tread lightly and to not underestimate the power of studying something and then educating people about that thing. But not to study something to achieve a certain goal, but to really study something to better understand it. So that's the first somewhat rambly thought. And then second is, would this group be part of the task force that might become a permanent task force on racism, or would it be a separate entity that is doing this work? And so I think I would kind of, with the others, where do these three working groups live? And are they part of one task force? Is this somehow separate? So I think I would, and if you don't have an answer right now, that's totally fine, but I would just encourage you to think about that, about who does the work. And if I missed that, I apologize.
Abe, if I could just jump in there.
That's what I got.
The one thing that's different here with the other groups is there is an existing framework for addressing some parts of this, and that is a small area plan. And the ANC is already committed to being heavily involved in that. And so I think, a lot of these things will feed into the small area plan, which is, again, short term, that's the next year. And so obviously that's going to be a focus, I think. A lot of the effort with the small area plan, I think, is making sure that we've got something that's compatible with the community, that the community will buy into, but that addresses these affordable housing issues. And so that's a part of the structure anyway.
Okay, I think that's a great place for this to potentially live. I wonder, and I will not be on the ANC to see this happen, so it's really a wondering. I wonder if there's a way to say that group, or the ANC commissioners who are on that group, the small area plan group, approach their work with some sort of either anti-racist or in some sort of lens that is informed by the work that your group has done. Because if you can get this to be part of the conversation, I think you're more likely to get people to be studying things and more openness, because I think this is a story that doesn't get told, and I think maybe hasn't gotten told in small area planning working groups in the past, I would imagine. And if it is, just like your presentation showed tonight, maybe there's an opening that you can have there. So that's my recommendation.
Thank you. Jerry?
A few things. One, even when OP made a presentation at our last meeting and they talked about the small area plan, what they talked about was the Connecticut Avenue corridor. That's the only thing they really talked about. They didn't talk about any zoning changes within the neighborhood. And I agree with Chris and Abe, and I guess Shanda was saying the same thing, that it's, well, a couple of issues. One, duplexes are going to go for $2 million no matter where they are in this neighborhood. That's just what they're going for these days. They're going for more than the single family homes that they replaced. Right now, when you see any of these type of dwellings that you're talking about, they're on sort of the outskirts of inner neighborhoods. You see some on Connecticut Avenue near Nebraska. You see some on the west side, off of Connecticut Avenue, closer to the Circle, multi-unit dwellings that are, 4 units maybe in there. So even now, when those kinds of dwellings are built, they're built in ways that create more housing, but they're in areas that are more homogeneous with the community. When we brought up, when there was an issue about a year and a half ago in Shanda's neighborhood about the group home, we haven't had that much excitement in an ANC meeting ever. And this was to have, and the same issues came up. They talked about parking. They talked about, less room in the neighborhood, but just having that, which was a very basic thing. They didn't mind having one group home, but having 2 group homes just blew everybody away. You could imagine what might happen now. And Chris had a great idea with the area near the Episcopal school. So I just wanted to mention that. But the other thing that we haven't talked about that I want to bring up is the recommendation that you had in terms of the accessory dwelling units. So today there was, I don't know if he's still on, Alan Sieber had a very good post on the Chevy Chase listserv, issues that I haven't thought about before because I don't know much about accessory dwelling units. But, I read that and I said, I can't wait for the bigger meeting when he gets a chance to talk about some of these things because, it really opened my eyes to some issues. But then I thought, where are they in our neighborhood now? Do any exist? Where can I go look at them? What do they cost? How many people live in them? Anything. There must be at least one example, 2 examples. I don't know, but it would be very beneficial to have something that I could visualize and have some more information about, because when you mentioned, Connie, when you were talking about it, you said if we only increased it by, I think you said 14%, something like that, that I'm trying to envision where these units are going to be. Are they going to be in an alley? Are they going to be in the back of somebody's yard? How does all of that work? I don't know. And Alan Sieber brought up some good issues that just made me think about this more. And I realized I don't even know what they look like because I haven't seen any in this neighborhood. So I think that too is something that, on face value, I think, yeah, it's probably a pretty cool idea. I know downtown in near, I guess it's near GW, they have some of these accessory dwelling units in alleys, off of alleys. They used to be carriage houses, and now they're places where people live. But I didn't know if that's what you're talking about and how it works out. Because I know we have some old carriage houses in our neighborhood, and if that's what you're talking about, converting something like that into this, or in a new building in somebody's yard. So I'd like to get smarter about that stuff and knowing if these exist and how they work and just what they do to the to the environment, to the infrastructure in the neighborhoods that they exist would be helpful.
There's a simple answer to that, Jerry.
Wait,
They're all over
could
the
I?
place.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Just a second, if I could. And Connie, I'll get to you in just a second, but I just want to call attention to the commissioners that our ANC is on record with regard to the ADUs. There was a whole revision of the zoning code in 2013. And our ANC in November 2013 passed a resolution adopting a task force report that was chaired by Gary Thompson, and Alan Sieber was on that task force, that specifically approved the new development standards for accessory buildings. And we're not saying any of that should be changed. All we're saying is that there should be a better process for getting those approved that doesn't make it so difficult for people to actually take advantage of the standards that we as an ANC approved 7 years ago.
So let me just say something real quick. Sorry, Connie, for interrupting you. Accessory, it's not accessory building, it's accessory units. An accessory unit can be in your basement. You can take your garage and make it into an efficiency. That's an accessory unit. Or you can have a separate building in the back. So you can see a new one on Livingston Street. That's that new building, that giant building they built on Livingston Street between Connecticut and Chevy Chase Parkway. It's got a big accessory dwelling in the back. So at least it appears to be one. But
yeah, I thought that was a garage. I don't know.
I think there's an accessory dwelling on the top, but there's so many regulations about building a new accessory building. The alley has to be a certain width, or you can't do it. They're very hard to build new accessory dwelling units under current zoning.
Connie?
I was just going to make a general statement, which is that it is emotional. I mean, our home is where we live. And so I've seen some emotion here tonight. I've seen, some considered questions and judgment and so forth. I think the most important thing I want to leave everyone with is if we can spark curiosity and we can continue to want to learn more and understand how we feel about certain things and how we want to move forward, I think that's where we want to be. And in our own work group, that's what we talked about. We're not mandating anything. We're not saying things must happen a certain way. We're saying that there's some opportunity here, like the small area plan, for us to be very engaged in that, to understand what that means and where those boundaries are. And if the Office of Planning only spoke about the Connecticut corridor, but also streets beyond that, we should be engaged in that and try to understand how we can bring in more housing options that really can help all of us. We have aging parents and some of them need caretakers, and where do we put them? How do we do that? If we want to age in place, how do we do that? I'm involved now because I am not so old yet, but at some point I will be. And if I put in the time today, then in 10, 15, 20 years, I'm going to have the city I want to live in, the neighborhood I want to live in. And so this is just the beginning of a conversation. No one's saying anything, you must do anything. What we are saying is, let's examine these issues. There is a history. Let's try to be responsive to what we've been hearing all around us, okay? Because the statistics are showing that we're not very diverse, okay, across income and background, and we know this. And how do we make this place more affordable and more vibrant? And how do we bring this community together? And even if we have a knee-jerk reaction and feeling, can we just take a breath and try to listen and see how we can move forward and listen to all these opinions and come to a conclusion that is satisfactory? It's not going to please everyone, okay? We cannot possibly do that, but we can have, a conversation that is meaningful, so we can create a future that we're going to be proud of, so that really my kids and my grandkids can look back and say that I did something today, okay, that I didn't stand aside and I wasn't fearful of engaging in a conversation that might make me uncomfortable, that I was okay with sacrificing some things to make someone's life better. That is what we're talking about here. And so I just hope that this is clear. It's just the beginning of a conversation.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
So just so you know, I'm not a total reactionary. I was involved in the historic district issue about 10 years ago on the ANC. Actually, I kind of led the issue for the ANC. It was the most horrible experience I've ever been through in my life. I got calls from people, threats on the phone. When you get one of those, you just want to walk away. So I'm very worried that if this is not approached in a very calm and quiet way, we're going to be back in that mode again, because people feel threatened when you try to change their house or change their neighborhood. And so I'm very cognizant of that. And we do represent our our constituents. And you know, we're elected officials. We're not private citizens who can just say anything we want. And we do have to be careful about what we say, how we say it, and what we suggest. I'm not saying that the future is single family. You know, our neighborhoods are probably not, it's not very green, like everybody said, but it might get greener if we have all electric cars and we have self-driving cars and stuff. But still, it's you know, I just think we have to look at the whole picture and not just the ideal picture, which is what I'm afraid that some of this stuff in the housing group goes toward.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're at a point where we should end for tonight on this presentation. We're 40 minutes over.
No, true. I think you should. And Randy, I don't know if you want to, before we go to you for the next steps, I at least want to say that, you know, I, like you, Connie, and everyone else who worked on these groups, envision this as a holistic process, a collaborative process that, you know, both the commissioners and the community and the task force members, we can have a dialogue about this, because ultimately it's true. What we want is not only to create, look and acknowledge our past, right? Take responsibility, but look at the present and create the best future for Chevy Chase DC possible. You know, not only for us as we, you know, get older, but for our children and other generations, and to leave a framework to know that there is a community who cares about all people, and that is the goal, and that everyone is treated with equity on this earth here. So to the extent, I think, as I mentioned, we are ahead of the so-called, you know, curve here. Other communities are just passing these type of resolutions. Other communities are just starting to deal with these issues in this context. And there are probably many more issues we could be dealing with. Our report really didn't even get into the transportation context and the equity of that. So we have a long way to go, but this is a great first step. So with that, I just want to thank everyone, and over to you, Randy.
Okay, thanks Connie and Sarah and Ron. Okay, next steps, the process that we're going to follow, I'll let Shanda, you want to lead this, or Jerry? I can also just describe it.
Yes, Randy, I think you described it very well.
Okay, what we're going to do for the next couple of weeks is, first of all, the various working groups are going to go back and take into account the comments that have been made from the commissioners. And we will decide then whether there's some changes that need to be made in the reports. That's going to take place over the next week or so. And then we want to have probably a little bit longer than that, maybe. We're also going to be answering I don't think there were very many questions in the Q&A, Abe, were there?
No.
There were
We
17
had
questions.
we had 6 questions that I recorded that were not answered.
We will try to answer those questions. But then we want to have a meeting that's devoted entirely to looking at the task force reports and taking comments and questions from the community. And that's going to be on November 16th. That's the plan now. At least that's what Jerry and Shanda and I were talking about. So we'll have an extra meeting in November. And we can tell just by the discussion with commissioners tonight that this is going to provoke a lot of questions and comments, and we need to give the community an opportunity to discuss that. And before that too, the drafts are all on our website now for the community to look at. And if we make modifications to them, those will go up as well, so that we can really begin, as Shanda said, to have this conversation. And it's important, I think, for all of us to take a deep dive and to figure these things out, because they're important. I mean, on housing, I keep thinking, you know, people say that zip code is destiny. And a lot of people, for that's true. Where you live dictates how the rest of your life is going to be. So we've got to think about those kinds of things. And it's going to be a struggle. But then the idea would be that after the 16th, perhaps on our meeting on November 23rd, and if not, our meeting in December, the ANC will take up a resolution on the task force report, either adopting it completely, the task force reports, or having adopting it with modifications. And we'll, again, as we always do, try to get a consensus among the commissioners on how we're going to proceed. Jerry?
Can I ask a question about that? I think tonight we heard 23 different recommendations. Will we be, say there's 23 in the next round, will we be voting on each one of those recommendations? Or will we be voting on the report as a whole? Because
Well,
we can vote on whatever we want to vote on.
Yes.
Right.
What?
Exactly.
We can vote on whatever we want to vote on.
Oh, okay, but what's the thought right now? Are we voting on the whole report?
Well, since we're in draft form, right? Like, this was the first draft, right, Randy?
Yeah.
Everyone?
It's not the first draft, it's about the 12th draft.
Well, it's the first presentation draft, right? And I think based on our feedback tonight, the groups are going to go back and edit and modify the drafts. So do you want to see where those drafts are at that point, and then we can make a determination what type of voting we will do in what form?
Well, let me just say, the model I'm working on is the one we did with the Comprehensive Plan Task Force. Comprehensive Plan Task Force came up with a report.
Yes.
The commission took the report, and then we made our own recommendations.
Yes.
And we adopted some of them, we modified some of them, and we rejected some of them. So we can do whatever we want to.
Yes.
And it will be a matter of our coming together with a resolution that can get a majority vote, hopefully a unanimous vote. But you know, that will be a process that we'll go through as a commission to come up with that.
But one other suggestion, that in the next round, I think it's important for, in terms of transparency, that when we identify, each of the groups should identify their group members, and they should be identified with their name, their occupation, and their affiliation. And I think that's important in terms of transparency.
I know you're talking.
I agree.
I'm just saying, you know,
I agree.
Nothing in particular in mind, but I think that people have to know who it is that's writing the report.
No,
Okay.
we can.
The report, our report, I know, and I suspect it's true with the others. Our report was unanimous. You know, everybody subscribed to the report.
Still, I think it's important that we do that. Chris, you were going to say something?
No, I agree with you completely, because I think some people, where they're coming from, you know, has something to do with their background, and I'm not gonna say any more than that, but
true with all of us.
Yeah.
Right.
But we're elected commissioners. People knew our background when they elected us.
Or
So
not
I want to caution us just with one thing, and I was going to say something about this before this part, but I think we should be thinking about how we talk about this publicly, how we email about it on the listserv, and any sort of response we do. There's a lot of material in here that if you don't read the whole report, or you have, let's call it a knee-jerk response, you could really misinterpret some of the things or some of the work that we've asked people to do. I would hate for someone to read the housing report and say, ANC recommends something crazy. I'm not even going to say it, because that's not, we're not there yet. We're talking about how we want to vote and how we want to keep talking about this. And that's okay. We should be allowed to do that. So I would just caution us all to really think about, you know, how we do that in a way that's respectful of everyone, and also just, you know, the next 10 or 12 days are probably the most political time of the entire year. So I just think we should really be thoughtful about that.
Right. And then also remember our goal. Our goal of our report is concrete action steps to look at racial equity, diversity, and justice. And so I really want to encourage us with that. And it is true. This is a draft for the community. Our work groups have worked very hard, put a lot of time and energy in this, and we want to come up with a report. And I agree with Randy that we should support a report to the community on that. And and move forward as in a holistic process.
And that's why an executive summary is very important, because many people are not going to read an 80-page report.
Right.
I mean, it took me a day and a half to get through it, and a very complete, concise executive summary, maybe 2 pages that has all the points clearly stated, is very important.
Right. And we'll have that next time. Every group will.
And I think we really need to remember and you just mentioned it, Shanna, the task force, I'm reading from the framework, the task force on racism, says the task force's objective is to focus on substantive issues and specific actions that the commission can take.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we should be concentrating on, that the commissions can take. So if what the commission can do is recommend something, doesn't mean that it has to do it, but we should be explicit in how we make sure that all of our recommendations are actually specific actions that the commission can take, because that was our charge from the beginning.
That's a great suggestion.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So no, this was a great first step. So we see what we have and now how we can hone it even further.
Yeah.
I think the only one thing I'd add is, and I mentioned this a couple times, is to various working groups, I think each one should have a recommendation for how their work is continued and what is the structure that they want to continue in, or that should be part of our resolution.
Yes.
Because it seems like there are different places for them to fit in, and we should be explicit about how that works.
I agree.
Okay. All right. Anything more on this topic, or can we go on to the next?
No, we have more business.
Yes, we did.
Go through the checks.
What?
It's the checks, right?
No. We've
Not
got.
yet.
We have more business?
Yes, we do.
You gotta be kidding. It's almost 10 o'clock.
I realize that, and I apologize, but I mean, we were not able to hold people to the time limits that we had set for ourselves. So, and that's our fault, really, because we kept asking questions. Okay, the thing that came up over the weekend, and Chris, I mentioned this at the beginning of the meeting, an additional item on the agenda, and that is that we heard over the weekend that the grant for district bridges to do the grant, the Chevy Chase Main Street was withdrawn or taken back. And they did it after the award had already been given and an agreement had been signed. And nevertheless, the Department of Small and Local Business Development said that because of budgetary concerns, they were taking it back. Interestingly, there's another new Main Street for Pennsylvania Avenue East, and it was not taken back. And so that's a $175,000 grant that is just erased. And it was enacted as part of the budget and approved by the council and the mayor. So there's some questions whether this is even not for them to do that. But in any case, right now, I think what the ANC should do, since we have supported this Main Street very vigorously, first of all, in a June 22nd letter that we wrote to Councilmember Kenyon McDuffie and his committee, supporting the inclusion of this in the budget. And then I think all the commissioners, each one individually or some of us collectively, wrote letters in support of the district bridges application. That now we should advise the mayor and the council members and the head of the agency, the Department of Small and Local Business Development, that we think this grant should be reinstated immediately.
Yes.
And so I've written a resolution. I've shared it with Jerry. I haven't shared it with everyone. I just finished it about 4:30 this afternoon. But I would move that we approve this resolution. I'll send it around to everyone just so you have the language. But I would move that we approve this resolution to ask for the restoration of the money and the funding for the Chevy Chase Main Street. This is, as I point out in the resolution, this is integral really to all the other things that we're doing. The small area plan,
It's all one thing.
it's all connected. And for them to take away now our Main Street is going to hurt our businesses. It's going to hurt our ability to draw other people into the community. This is just not acceptable. So I move that we make it very clear to the mayor and the council and the agency that this needs to be restored. So there's, yeah, second, okay, with discussion, Shanda?
Well, I just wanted to add to that I guess there were over 100 letters of support for this, and perhaps we could get the people who wrote letters of support to also write letters or to support this effort to get it reinstated. In addition to that, I would also encourage us to announce it to the community so that residents can weigh in on this.
Well, this just came up, and so Jerry has been doing a lot of that work already. And I've sent emails over the weekend to the mayor and to several council members asking them to reconsider this, just in my capacity as the ANC commissioner. And so I think a resolution, though, is really going to be important to follow up on that.
And I've had communication with Mary Che's office, and I sent a letter to Christy Whitfield, who's the director of DSLBD, today, outlining everything. It was a long letter, and I included the names of all the letters of support, their affiliations. I highlighted commissioners, candidates, associations, and all of that. And since we've sent some individual letters, and then if we have a resolution, it's like a multi-pronged attack. Well, you know, the next thing would be get the 5 organizations to write something, and the next thing would be the residents, you know, building to do
and obviously the importance of the resolution is that that's entitled to great weight, whereas individual commissioners' letters are not.
Right.
So I think it's really important that we get this out and get it out quickly, so that it at least puts the pressure on all of the elected officials and appointed officials that this needs to be fixed.
Yeah, it's like we're being punished for something.
Yeah.
we're doing everything we can to work with them on so many other things, and then they're, you know, punishing us for this. I don't understand it, but
this is a political decision. We're not going to understand it, but but I think we absolutely should do the resolution. We absolutely should get residents to write to their council members. There's at least 2 council members we'd be writing to, probably more. People need to know that this is going to cost them votes.
Yeah.
As in, council members need to know that this is going to cost them votes in the next 2 weeks.
And additionally,
we should be taking full advantage of that. There's no reason we should be. We should definitely be talking to residents about this.
Yes, because it wasn't just an announcement. They actually had a meeting with us where the director, or she came and did the presentation to the entire community.
That was, it wasn't the director, that was District Bridges. And
the executive director of District Bridges.
Right.
And we have a copy of the letter from DSLBD to District Bridges dated September 28th, congratulating them on the award. All I had to do is sign something, and they signed something, they sent it in, and then a few days later they said, only kidding, only kidding. You don't really have this. So yeah, it is, the whole thing is.
So, okay, we've got a motion and a second. All those in favor of adopting the resolution? 5-0. Okay. All right, the business for tonight, then what I'm going to suggest, Abe just circulated the draft minutes just before the meeting tonight, and I suggested to Abe that maybe we should just wait until next week to, or next meeting to adopt the minutes. I don't think there's any necessity that we do it tonight, so I'm going to ask to postpone that. And checks, Shanda, you have some checks to approve?
Yes, we have 4 checks written on October 23rd. The first one was to U.S. government for $67.47 for the federal employee quarterly tax return. The next one was to the government as well, IRS for Form 491, dealing with employee taxes for $292.70. The check number 617 was to Verizon, which is $153.24. And the last check is check 618 to the Department of Employee Services for the taxes as well. And that was $152.74. We are being taxed. Okay. So that was the last one.
Okay, all those in favor of approving those checks? 5-0, okay. Our November 9th meeting, I'm sure we will have things we will need to discuss about the task force. We'll also have 2 pieces of testimony that I know of right now that we'll need to talk about and discuss and possibly vote on. And that's, first of all, the proposed amendments to the comprehensive plan. I am signed up to testify on the 12th or 13th. They haven't given me a date yet of November. And then the other piece of testimony is for the roundtable on the Council's Committee on Transportation and the Environment on the Slow Streets program. And that testimony is on the 16th of November. So we'll need to approve that at that meeting as well. And I've signed up to testify there too. So we're on the list in both places. Okay, anything else? It's 10 o'clock.
No.
Why stop now?
Yeah.
We're having so much fun, right? Okay, thanks for all of the people who attended tonight. We really appreciate it. This is, we're struggling with a lot of difficult issues now. And this is, as Shanda said, you know, we're among the first to be really discussing these issues as intently as we are. And it's going to take some time to work them out. But I think this is exactly the right thing we ought to be doing. And I'm encouraged that our commission is taking that step. And I've heard, by the way, from a lot of constituents who have said, this is amazing that the commission is doing this kind of work.
Yeah.
So, okay. Thank you all very much. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Everyone for coming. Thank you.
Good night. Thanks,
Good
everyone.
night.